welcome. It's that time of the week again. Of course, it's time for the Israel Report. And I'd like to introduce my brother in Israel. Elon, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Jay. Good to see your face too.
Good to see you. And of course, we have Jacob with us today. We're going to discuss some things in Israel.
Shalom lachem, kol tuv, v'shabbat shalom lekulam. Wonderful to be with you. Good Shabbos, Gittin Shabbos.
Thank you, Jacob. Good to have you here now. Elon, why don't you kick us off with what's happening in Israel? A lot of things going on.
Okay, then. So, from what I've been looking at in the Israeli media and also following a number of accounts I follow in X, the main things that have come out this week, of course, certain events in America have overshadowed. Even in the Israeli media, they've overshadowed everything, almost everything else. But at the start of the week, of course, we were very pleased, in a sense, that the leaders, that's at least a good quantity of the remaining Hamas leaders who were hiding out in Qatar were eliminated. So I'm just going to touch very briefly on that because, of course, other events have overshadowed it. But as someone wrote at the time, he says, I don't know, he said, if anyone realizes how monumental this day is, Israel didn't just breach Qatari airspace. They didn't just take out the key Hamas leadership. They took the first significant action in history against the Qatari Islamic terror regime, the Global Muslim Brotherhood Command Center. Now that is very significant. This marks again a turning point where they're not going to be allowed to get away with it like they used to. And I think I hope this sets a precedent, not just from Israel, but also from other nations, that they cannot allow this little tin pot regime with all this money to keep on flooding terrorist coffers with cash and also poisoning nations in the West. Maybe this will be the beginning of something good. Because you might, I don't know if anyone ever saw the footage of the Hamas leaders. They were celebrating in Qatar. They were watching the screens and celebrating the live feeds, as Israelis were slaughtered on October the 7th. So, they managed to escape justice, but now that's the end of it for them. Interestingly, there was a debate in the UN not only a few days ago, and the Israeli ambassador to the UN, Hillel Neuer, was calling out Qatar as a state sponsor of terror. So the ambassador from Pakistan interrupts him, and then for a while. So the council president, the UN council president, says, "I give you the Israeli." He says to the Israeli ambassador, "I give you back the floor. You have 4 seconds left." And Hillel Neuer says, "Mr. President, Pakistan is another state sponsor of terror." End quote. I thought very good, very good. Yeah.
Elon, let me ask you a real quick question on that count. For those that don't know, the Qataris let them Hamas have this political office to do mediation back in 2012 after leaving Syria. They thought it was just going to be this political office, but here's the question I have. To me, just like you just kind of stated, it sounds like the Taliban hosting Al Qaeda. Should the Qataris known better that when you host a terrorist organization in your country, you're endangering the civilians of your country?
Well, the Qatari, the Qatari, what you call it, nation, regime, there's not that actual many Qataris. Most of the population of Qatar actually is people who are effectively in serfdom, or they're bound into contracts and all kinds of things that make it almost impossible for them to leave the place. It really is almost like slave labor. And most of the population is foreign workers. under these under sometimes egregious conditions. It's a horrible little regime, actually. It could really do with disappearing off the planet. Yeah. So I don't think they're too bothered. I mean, I have actually heard recently that there may be some split happening in the Qatari leadership, that some people are beginning to realize after this, elimination of Hamas within the, that they might just get into some trouble now. Their money can't shield them from everything.
The Israeli attack did kill the son of one of the senior leaders and some other people, but it was not as effective as I think the Israelis would have liked it to be. But it does set a precedent. Qatar
Yes.
has been at odds with Saudi Arabia because of the shared gas field underneath the Persian Gulf. It is in at least an economic partnership with Iran. At the same time, at least as an air base to the United States.
Yes, that's another, isn't it?
And it is the headquarters of Al Qaeda. I'm sorry, of Al Jazeera, of the voice of terror news medium. They don't call it that, the voice of terror, but that's what it is. It is a basically pro-radical Islamic media that broadcast propaganda and even things that you'd have to say are pro-radical Islamic. Al Qaeda. That is what is in Qatar. Again, almost all the national leadership, I would say all of them, are very much Muslim Brotherhood. Same Muslim Brotherhood that controls Hamas, same Muslim Brotherhood that has its American association with the Council of American Islamic Relations, that they were able to continue after September 11th with the blessings of George Bush and Cheney, because the Saudi Arabians had the Bush administration in their back pocket. And so CAIR was allowed to continue and were not prosecuted. They were just named as unindicted co-conspirators. The Saudi Arabians didn't want Bush to offend them, and Bush didn't, and Cheney didn't want to offend the Saudi Arabians, so they were never prosecuted. There was nothing happened, thanks to Bush. After September 11th, this is Qatar. This is, however, the Muslim Brotherhood. They killed Anwar Sadat. They killed Sadat for making peace with Israel. They have a military branch in Gaza. Okay, it is supported and armed, or has been supported and armed, by Iran, but it is definitely controlled politically and ideologically by the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is an umbrella, or it's like Crime Incorporated. There were different mafia families in Crime Incorporated, but they're under the same umbrella of Crime Incorporated. That is how we look upon the Muslim Brotherhood. That is exactly what they are. And they've always been that. Wreaking havoc in moderate Arab countries, wreaking havoc in the West, and doing so, being allowed to get away with it by corrupt Western politicians. When General al-Sisi overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and saved Egypt from the Muslim Brotherhood, who had killed Sadat, Anwar Sadat, Barack Obama protested. Barack Obama's corrupt regime wanted a Muslim Brotherhood government in Egypt. Bush was the same. This is how corrupt the American government has been under both Democrats and Republicans. Again, pander to the Saudis and pander to the Qataris. That is the reality of it.
What else do you have for us, Andy?
Okay, well, another thing that came that I'll deal with some of the smaller items in a minute, but there's been all of this fuss of Britain, France, Spain, some others saying that they're going to recognize a Palestinian state. Now, this is quite interesting. This is this guy Gilad Erdan. He was actually Israel's ambassador to the US and the UN. And also he's been a minister and a Knesset member. And this is just part of an article an op-ed, I think, he put in Israel Hayom. today. I think it was today. And in referring to this recognition of this Palestinian terror state, he was saying that this is not so much a diplomatic tsunami, he said, but rather a case of short-sighted European politicians scoring domestic points at the cost of encouraging Hamas and prolonging the war. And this is very interesting. He says, while there may be no immediate cause for alarm, he says, the long-term threat is far more serious. These recognitions are part of a broader global effort to entrench a dangerous narrative that Israel is a country that occupies, violates human rights, and kills children. This is both the warning and the opportunity. Israel cannot afford to keep fighting the public opinion war through ad hoc crisis management. We respond to extreme incidents instead of waging a proactive, strategic, and visionary campaign. He said that the foreign ministry of Israel still operates under an outdated model of classic diplomacy, while the real battles are being waged on TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube, platforms where the Israeli voice is nearly absent. And this is precisely where Israel must immediately go on the offensive. It's not enough to show our better side. We must constantly expose the crimes of our enemies. We must present the world with the brutality of Hamas and Hezbollah, the Iranian funding of terrorism, and the cynical use of children and civilians as human shields. Even when dealing with hostile media outlets, whether anti-Semitic publications like the New York Times or broadcasters like Al Jazeera, Israel must go on the offensive, undermine their credibility, and denounce anyone attempting to whitewash this brutality. A broad and aggressive perception campaign will only become possible if we recognize this as a full-scale battlefield and equip a future public diplomacy chief of staff with a security-level budget and toolkit. The battle for perception is not a secondary engagement in scope. It determines whether Israel will retain the legitimacy to defend itself in future wars. It's time to recognize that public diplomacy and perception are integral parts of our national security. Anyone who thinks wars are won solely with tanks and aircraft is mistaken. In the 21st century, battles are also won on screens, and we must win there too. And this really ties into very much the assassination of Charlie Kirk, because he wasn't, as people keep saying, he wasn't assassinated because he was a politician. He was assassinated because he was successful in presenting the truth, and people were convinced by it. And I thought that's very, very interesting. And one of the things that this Israel ambassador in the article mentioned was that, if Israel becomes delegitimized, it can end up being on the wrong end of crippling economic and other sanctions, which would hinder its ability to defend itself in the long run. Because if you can't, if you're economically destroyed, you can't buy or sell weapons, which you need to defend yourself on the physical battlefield. So, but also in the press here, because this has overshadowed everything else, there were some really nice tributes to Charlie Kirk. And I'll just give a few of the things here. It said that, Charlie stood as a genuine defender of the state of Israel, a passionate advocate who successfully confronted pro-Palestinian activists. Few have stood by us as powerfully. A farewell to a true friend and a gifted rhetorician. Later on, it says, Charlie stood as a genuine friend of the state of Israel. But it goes down a bit farther on. It says, it remains uncertain how the US will recover from this incident and its ultimate consequences, but clearly Kirk's assassination constitutes a defining moment. Each social advocate engaged in debates and ideological battles, particularly regarding Israeli advocacy, now faces genuine mortal danger. Kirk was assassinated and became a casualty in his struggle for truth. He was assassinated on stage with a microphone in hand while performing what he excelled at most. This marks a dark day in US history, but furthermore, it marks a dark day for the state of Israel, which lost one of its finest and most genuine representatives. That was such a moving tribute to him. And this guy also that wrote this column, he was saying that in future people will have to, Israel advocates will have to be a lot more careful with their security, but at the same time they're not going to stop advocating, which is encouraging. Yeah.
To your point, Elon, it's like the number of Charlie Kirk messages that are on TikTok, for example.
All over
They're
the place,
numerous, but but now it's a vacuum. You know who else is very much there? Islamic apologists. And it's crazy because they put out as many videos as Charlie Kirk. Now, the viewership might be a little bit skewed right now, but
Yes.
it's gaining a lot of momentum on TikTok and other social media platforms for Islamic apologists. There's numerous commentators that are doing the same thing, trying to discredit Christianity, discredit Judaism and Israel. And I'd say it's like almost 10-1 when it comes to support of Palestine over Israel when it comes to these social media platforms.
Yes, yes. It is the prince of the power of the air.
There are two things we need to take into account. The first is something I outlined briefly last week, but it's appropriate to do it again. The Islamic world, in its opposition to Israel, has always been fantastic at doing things that backfire on it and hurt its own cause. Three things have happened as a result of what they're doing. One, by making Israel a pariah state, it is giving the Israeli government an opportunity to push for an annexation of the West Bank because they no longer have to care about international opinion. International opinion is against them. There's no longer a fear of being declared a pariah state when you have governments like Ireland and Spain more than happy to do it. When you have people like Macron and Marz and Carney in Canada prepared to reward Hamas for terror by giving diplomatic recognition. There is nothing for Israel to lose anymore. So they've created a political impetus in Israel, a nationalist political impetus to annex what they call the Shtichim, the West Bank territories. Secondly, Israel was politically highly, highly divided. The issue of judicial reform was pulling the Israeli government to pieces. Not only was it the traditional Labor Party against the Likud Party or things of this nature, or the religious parties opposing the secular parties, or the extreme left-wing parties fighting the other parties. You had division, schism within the Likud. There were at one point 3 factions vehemently opposed to each other within the Likud coalition of Benjamin Netanyahu. By doing what they did and continuing to do what they're doing, they have caused the Israelis to basically unite in the name of self-defense and survival, put these domestic differences on the back burner, and coalesce. It has allowed Mr. Netanyahu to stay in power. His government might not have succeeded, or his leadership of the Likud might not have succeeded had this not happened. Again, it backfires on them. They need to get rid of Netanyahu from their point of view, and they've strengthened his hand. The third thing, and this should not be overlooked, we've already seen it from France, we've seen it from Ethiopia, we've seen it from the former Soviet Union. With the unprecedented growth of anti-Semitism unseen since the 1930s and 40s now, it increases aliyah, it increases immigration of Jews from the diaspora. Certainly, it's happened with France, but now it is going to happen in other countries if this continues. So they're going to increase the Jewish population of Israel. One of the weapons the Palestinian Authority, particularly Fatah, had was demographics, a high birth rate. Again, that would be challenged by the ultra-Orthodox, but now it's being challenged by Aliyah, by immigration. So these three things have combined to hurt their own cause in a significant manner. You see this already with the amounts of Jews. I was up on the Temple Mount with Orthodox Jews. I was up there with Rabbi Yehuda Glickman, up on the Temple Mount on the Har Habayit. You see Jews at the Tomb of the Patriarchs, built over the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. These things are not just symbolic; they're realities. They are realities. They are wanting a Palestinian state from the river to the sea. They're losing the West Bank and giving Israel the impetus to expand further than they otherwise would have due to political consequences that no longer even exist. To these three things, I would add a fourth factor. A significant amount of the financial backing of the Democratic Party in certain states, Illinois, New York, and California particularly, but to a lesser degree in other states, certainly Florida, Pennsylvania, came from left-wing or liberal Jews. With the majority of the Democrats moving to the socialist, anti-Zionist left, they are losing part of their financial base of Jewish support in the United States that will strengthen the hand of Donald Trump. These people like Schumer and Wasserman Schultz are caught between a rock and a hard place. The extreme anti-Zionist left of their own party and a Democratic Party that they came up in but no longer exists. So again, the capacity of the Democratic Party to take on Trump is being hurt because they're isolating Jewish supporters and voters in key states. Again, the Jewish vote in New York and New Jersey remains significant. Again, they are hurting themselves. What this tells me is it confirms what the scriptures tell us is going to be the case. Hine lo yanum velo yishan shomer Israel. He who keepeth Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Don't just look at what these nations are doing. Why are the nations in an uproar against the Lord and his anointed? Look at what God is doing. Look at what God is doing. He's causing these things to bring further calamity and adversity upon their own selves. That is what is happening. And it's happening in those three or four significant ways. All of these things cannot be ignored and are going to play an important position in whatever unfolds in the Middle East certainly in the next decade. There's no stopping it now. Would you agree, Elon?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. The Lord makes the councils of the nations, to fall back upon themselves, the Lord can take wicked people's actions and make them fall into their own traps sometimes. And I think this is happening.
Yes.
Really.
Real quickly, I just wanted to add today, just to speak about Jerusalem, we have this message from a viewer. Jerusalem attack update. At Ramat Junction, 2 terrorists opened fire on civilians. They killed 6 and injured 12, and 6 of them are in serious condition. The 2 terrorists were neutralized by civilians and an off-duty soldier. Also, a hotel stabbing today, the 12th. A Palestinian employee stabbed 2 guests at the hotel Kibbutz Suba, located just outside Jerusalem. Casualties: 2 Israeli men were wounded in the attack, one suffering critical injuries. So I want to encourage everyone to please, as we always do
Yes.
here, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, but pray for the victims that are going through medical treatment right now
Yes.
during this time, I guess, where there's been serious attacks in Israel just today, hours ago.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
This is just the reality. It seems to be with Israel, that they've been dealing with what we're seeing with Charlie Kirk for a very long time. I don't think a
Yeah.
lot of Westerners understand that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We need to understand something also. It's not popularly known among believers or the general public, but if you listen to Islamic scholars who practice dawah, who try to defend and propagate Islam, the work of some scholarly evangelists, it began with the late Dr. Nabil Karushi, who's now with the Lord, but certainly it continues with figures such as someone I know, Dr. J. Smith, certainly, with Dr. David Wood, with Hatun Tash, with Fatah, what's his name, the Saudi Arabian. Anyway, Muslims are having the same kind of problem on internet that Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons,
Yeah, that's right.
Roman Catholics, and Orthodox Jews are having. There are scholarly arguments challenging the foundations of Islamic presupposition. They're showing people that, look, there was nothing ever written in the 7th century. Nothing written in the 7th century. Not one manuscript naming Mohammed or the Quran. That much of what is written about Muhammad in the Hadith came up to 3 centuries later. This is not like the New Testament, where we actually have fragments of first century documents like the Thyssen text and copies of first century documents, where it is widely known by any honest scholar that we have copies of manuscripts of the Gospels that were made by the apostles or people who knew the apostles. 10,000 codexes and manuscript fragments and papyri of the New Testament alone, largely the gospel, but not only the gospel. Islam has nothing like that. It doesn't have anything from the century of Muhammad. This is becoming known, much like the Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons are going into crisis. Much like Roman Catholicism is losing people, although it's gaining others, because of what is on the internet. Their religious leaders cannot control what people watch when they surf the web. They are seeing these things. More of these things are being put into Arabic. More of these things are being put into Punjabi. More of these things are being put into Urdu, into other languages, and it's going to continue. As we know, is a significant, you'd have to say it's an avalanche in areas of Indonesia of Muslims becoming Christians. The increases that we see in the Far East, in Malaysia, coming now into Bangladesh and even Pakistan, not huge, but significant. But now Iran, not huge, but significant. Now Egypt, not huge, but significant, but also now among the Western Muslim diaspora living in Europe and America. Islamic scholars are admitting they're in trouble. They cannot argue. They cannot engage in academic scholarly argumentation. They cannot engage in it. They will lose. The evidence is not with them. And they're up against people who know what they're doing, including ex-Muslims. They cannot win the argument in terms of argumentation or symposium. They can't win. Therefore, the Islamic mind, the fundamentalist Islamic mind, is to resort to violence. That is one of the things that's happening. Something else that's happening that Elon pointed out in something he forwarded, that was a statement actually made by Brother Charlie before he gave up the ghost some time ago, Charlie Kirk, is that the left, when they're unable to win democratically, they do the same kind of thing. They lost the election in America, not just in an electoral landslide, but in a popular vote lost by a few million people, and they couldn't win one single swing state. They had very major losses among Hispanics, shifting from the left to the right, increasing numbers of blacks, increasing numbers of Jews, traditional left-wing voters, and it's begun among some of the youth, particularly Generation Z. So they're in trouble. When they get in trouble politically and they cannot win in an election, or they cannot win a Supreme Court decision, what do? They become violent. They become radical. Hence, we should expect radicalism and violence to continue, because that's the only weapon they have left. They can't win an argument. They can't win an election. They can't win a court case unless it's a left-wing Biden-appointed judge that will be overturned by a higher court. They can't win. They cannot win democratically or legally or in any sense of fair play or in any equitable forum or format. Therefore, they resort to violence. That is what the left will do. That is what fundamentalist Islam will do. So we need to brace ourselves for this, because that's the reality of the situation. They cannot win the argument fairly. And more people are seeing this on the internet. Just look at the impact that Charlie Kirk had. He had these students who were being force-fed all of this left-wing propaganda, indoctrination, and rhetoric by their professors and by left-wing activism on the campuses. They were listening to him. He was giving cogent argumentation, a response to what they were having forced down their throats. They couldn't argue with them, so they shoot him. This is what the reality is.
All right. Well, I think that concludes Israel Report, if I'm not mistaken. Elon?
Yes, I might stick around for a while, though. Is that okay?
Of course. You can stick around as long as you'd like.